Imagine pouring your heart and soul into music, writing, arranging, and performing on some of the biggest rock hits of the 70s and 80s, only to find out decades later that you were never properly paid. This isn't just a story of bad business deals. It's a story of betrayal, legal battles, and millions of dollars lost. For years, the legendary horn section of Chicago, the very sound that made them unique, was unknowingly getting shortchanged. But how did it happen? Who was responsible? And did they ever get justice? Stick around, because this is the shocking story of how Chicago's horn section got cheated out of millions. The rise of Chicago's iconic sound. Chicago burst onto the music scene in 1969, blending rock with jazz-influenced horns in a way no other band had done before. Unlike other rock bands of the time, where guitar and vocals dominated, Chicago's brass section, led by James Pankow, trombone, Lee Loughnane, trumpet, and Walter Parazaider, saxophone, was front and center. Their early hits like Make Me Smile, Does Anybody Really Know What Time It Is?, and Saturday in the Park were carried by soaring horn melodies that became the band's signature sound. But here's where things get tricky. While the band functioned as a unit, the business side of things wasn't as equal as the music suggested. And some members were making far more money than others. The fine print that changed everything. Like many young, ambitious musicians, Chicago's members were more focused on making music than reading contracts. Their management, led by the infamous James William Guercio, had structured their deals in a way that favored certain members over others. Chicago was initially set up as a corporation rather than an equal partnership. This meant that royalties, songwriting credits, and financial decisions weren't necessarily split evenly. Guess who got the short end of the stick? The horn section. While Robert Lamm, Terry Kath, and Peter Cetera were getting significant songwriting royalties, Pankow, Loughnane, and Parazaider, despite their essential contributions, were often paid as salaried musicians rather than equal partners. Millions in unpaid royalties. To truly understand how Chicago's legendary horn section was cheated out of millions, we have to break down how music royalties work, and how they were left out of the biggest money-making side of the industry. The songwriting royalty trap. In the music business, there are two major types of royalties: songwriting and publishing royalties. These are the big money makers. Every time a song is played on the radio, streamed, sold, or used in a commercial, the songwriters get paid. Performance royalties. These are paid to musicians when they perform a song live or when it's played publicly, but they're significantly smaller than songwriting royalties. The problem? Despite James Pankow, Walter Parazaider, and Lee Loughnane creating the iconic brass arrangements that define Chicago's sound, they were often treated as session musicians rather than songwriters. This meant that even though their horns were an essential part of hits like 25 or 6 to 4, Beginnings, and Does Anybody Really Know What Time It Is?, they weren't getting a cut of the publishing money. Instead, the songwriting credits and royalties were often split among the band's primary songwriters, like Robert Lamm, Terry Kath, and later, Peter Cetera. How much money did they lose? To put this into perspective, let's look at one of Chicago's most famous songs, 25 or 6 to 4, written by Robert Lamm. This song has been played millions of times on the radio, TV, and streaming services. The iconic horn riff is just as recognizable as the vocals, yet Pankow, Parazaider, and Loughnane didn't receive songwriting credit or royalties for their contributions. Saturday in the Park, another Lamm-penned hit, featuring rich brass harmonies that helped define Chicago's sound. Again, the horns played a major role but didn't receive equal compensation. Now, let's do some rough math. A song that generates 100 million streams on Spotify alone can earn over $500,000 in royalties. That's just one platform. When you factor in radio play, album sales, licensing, and touring revenue, a hit song can generate millions over its lifetime. If the horn section had been credited properly, they could have earned tens of millions collectively over the years. Instead, they were paid as salaried band members, receiving a flat fee for their performances rather than long-term residuals. James Pankow's growing frustration. By the late 70s and early 80s, James Pankow, who had written and arranged many of Chicago's greatest horn parts, started to realize the financial gap. He saw that Robert Lamm and Peter Cetera were living in luxury, while he and the other horn players, though successful, weren't seeing the same level of wealth. He tried to renegotiate better deals, but by that point, the business structure of the band was already established. Pankow eventually pushed for more credit on certain songs, but the damage had already been done. Decades worth of royalties had been lost. How this impacted their careers. Financial disparity. The uneven distribution of royalties led to some band members accumulating far more wealth than others, creating tension within the group. Power imbalance. Because money equals power in the music business, those who controlled the songwriting credits had more influence over band decisions and direction. Frustration and legal battles. Although Pankow and others fought for fairness later on, much of the money had already been signed away in old contracts. The worst part? They weren't alone. The Chicago horn section story isn't unique. Other legendary musicians have faced similar issues, including the Funk Brothers, Motown session band, created some of the greatest Motown hits but were never properly credited or compensated. The Wrecking Crew, Los Angeles studio musicians, played on records by the Beach Boys and the Monkees but were often paid session wages instead of royalties. This is why songwriting credits matter. If you don't negotiate them before the money starts rolling in, you may never see your fair share. A legacy of unfairness. Despite their undeniable contribution to Chicago's success, the band's horn players never fully recovered the millions in lost royalties. While some compensation adjustments were made later on, the financial gap between songwriters and non-songwriters remained massive. This wasn't just a bad business deal, it was a long-term financial betrayal that robbed some of Chicago's most talented members of the wealth they deserved. And that's the tragic truth of how Chicago's horn section was cheated out of millions. The ballad era and even more money lost. By the 1980s, Chicago had shifted toward a softer pop ballad sound led by Peter Cetera. Songs like Hard to Say I'm Sorry and You're the Inspiration were massive hits, but they had far less horn presence than their earlier material. This meant that the horn section's role in the band was shrinking, both musically and financially. Adding insult to injury, when Peter Cetera left in 1985, he took much of his songwriting wealth with him. The band carried on, but the financial imbalance remained. At this point, James Pankow and the other horn players started realizing just how much money they had lost over the years. But was it too late to do anything about it? The legal battles and justice. As the years went on, members of Chicago's horn section began to speak out about the financial disparities. James Pankow, in particular, expressed frustration over how the business side of the band had been handled. While he had written horn arrangements that defined Chicago's sound, the way royalties and publishing were structured left him earning significantly less than some of his bandmates. Did they ever get their fair share? While the details of private settlements and royalty negotiations aren't fully public, it's clear that millions of dollars were lost in the process. Some adjustments were made over time, and the band's financial structure evolved, but it's unlikely that the horn section ever truly recovered the wealth they rightfully deserved. A cautionary tale for musicians. The story of Chicago's horn section is a cautionary tale for any musician entering the industry. It's not just about talent, it's about business. If you don't understand royalties and publishing, you might create the magic, but never get paid for it. If you don't negotiate songwriting credits, you could miss out on millions. And if you don't fight for fairness, someone else will walk away with your earnings. For James Pankow, Lee Loughnane, and Walter Parazaider, their legacy is undeniable. They helped shape one of the greatest rock bands in history. But financially, they were cheated out of millions. Let this be a lesson to all musicians. Don't just play the music, own it. What do you think? Should the horn section have been compensated differently? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the music industry's hidden stories, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more content like this. Thanks for watching. and we'll see you in the next one.